Hello everyone. Welcome to another Q&A live on White David Gardening and Worm Farm. And as promised, I will be continuing our discussion of growing tomato and some of the challenges that we face with our tomato plants. And so today we are going to be discussing tomato blight. Okay, I'll just wait a few minutes. Okay, so we are discussing tomato blight. Sorry about that. Okay, so hi, Han White. We may have heard of tomato blight or we may have not. So we're going to be discussing the different types of tomato blights. We're going to be discussing the symptoms of these types of blights, and we're going to be discussing how we can get it under control. So we're going to start off by asking the first question, which is, how does blight spread? The fungal spores that cause tomato blight is spread by insects or animals or human contact with an infected plant and then coming in contact with another plant. That is one way by which it's spread. If we are handling water that is contaminated with this spore, then it will be transferred over to any plant that it comes in contact with as well. Also, the soil can be contaminated with these spores, and so we look at what? Insects, we said animals, we said water. Right, the wind is the next way that tomato blight can be spread. So the wind can carry the spores of one plant to another. So that is how blight is spread. Now we're going to look at the next question. What effect does moisture have on blight? Moisture is needed for blight to grow. So if blight exists in your soil or on your plant, as long as it gets moisture, then it will. Oh, hi, Joyce, Mom. I thought you were resting. You must be very tired. Hi, Sian. Right, so blight grows or reproduce when it has moisture. So now let's look at the next question. Can blight be cured? No. Once your plant develops blight, it cannot be cured, but I will be discussing ways that you can use to get it under control. So, next question. Have you ever experienced blight on your plants? And it's not only tomato plants that can have blight, other plants can have it as well. And I will be discussing, or at least I'll be telling you what some of those plants that can have blights apart from tomato are towards the end of this discussion. So I have experienced blight before, but I've never experienced it on my tomato plant. Unfortunately, at the time when that happened, I did not know that it was blight. So I did nothing about it because there wasn't anything I could do at that point in time because I didn't know what it was. So our next question is, How many types of blights are there or is there? There are three types of blights. You have one that is called early blight, there is one that is called late blight, and then there is the Septoria leaf spot. So there are three types of blight. Now, as you may notice, one is early blight and one is late blight. Does that mean that the early blight becomes late blight? No, they're actually two different types of blight, and they're caused by different types of bacteria or pathogens. So how can you identify early blight? In order to make sure that I do not miss any point here, because it's an important topic, because of how dangerous blight can be to your plants. So I'm just going to be reading what I have here, just to make sure I don't miss any point. So the symptoms that you're going to use to identify blight is that early blight usually appear after the first set of fruits grow on your tomato plants. So that is the first sign. The leaves will start to grow brown lesions on the lower part of the leaf. So the lower leaves, those are the ones that are closest to the ground. These are the areas that will start to show symptoms of early blight first. As it grows, it will start to look like target rings. And then the outer tissues that is surrounding these spots that look like target rings will actually get yellow. Then it will go brown, and then the leaves will eventually fall off. Sometimes these leaves will actually quail down and cling to the stem of the plant. So it won't necessarily fall off, but it will cling to the stem of your plant. So this is how you can identify early blight. Your seedlings, if they have blight, early blight, will actually start showing symptoms either at the point where the plant is exposed closest to the ground, or it will be on the stem of the plant, of the seedlings. Once your seedling has early blight, it will die. Okay, so the next symptoms is that the older part of the plant that is infected is either oval or irregular in shape with brown rings on it. So the next question is, how are the fruits affected by early blight? One, they can be affected at any stage during the maturity of your tomato. So as long as a tomato reach the maturity stage, then you will start to see what looks like leathery dark or black raised ridges on your tomatoes, and this is usually close to the stem of your tomatoes. So this is how you can identify whether your tomato is having early blight. Now the next question, when is early blight most likely to develop? Early blight is most likely to develop in moderate to warm temperatures, so temperatures between 59 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit is when early blight is most likely to develop. Now, have any of you ever experienced blight on your plants? And if so, I'd like to hear about it. What plants were they, and how did you go about treating the blight on your plant? So the next question is, can pathogen that cause early blight survive on tomato seeds? Yes, they can survive on tomato seeds, and so it is a good idea not to save seeds from any plant that had the blight on it, because if it grows on the seeds when you plant them is going to transfer the blight to the plant, and your seedlings are going to die. So it does not make sense to save them. And not only that, but as we mentioned, that wind transfers the virus, or sorry, the pathogen. So if wind is going to transfer it and water is going to transfer it, then you don't want to be planting these, because it can be transferred to other plants. Okay, so the next question: how does the lower leaves of your plant get infected? Well, your soil usually has the pathogen that causes early blight. I'm not saying that it always have it. No, that's not the case. But if your soil is infected, then the wind can spread the pathogen. Or if you water your plants or it rains and that water beat up from the soil, or the soil beat up from the ground onto the plant, if the soil is infected, then your plant is going to be infected as well. So that is how moisture affects moisture affects your plant when you have blight in the soil. Okay, so the next question: what does early blight need to germinate? It needs temperature between 40 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. It needs moisture or humidity of 90% or more, and that will cause your the pathogen, blight pathogen, to germinate. How can your soil get infected? The wind can carry it. Insects and animals can carry the pathogen. If you come in contact with a plant that is infected and you move about in your garden with the pathogen on you, you can transfer it to the plant. If you do not get rid of the plant or treat the plant as quickly as possible, then the entire plant is going to get infected, and that is going to cause it to get into the soil. So I'm going to be discussing, after I'm finished discussing the three types of blight and how you can identify them, I will be discussing how you can treat it. And so stay tuned for that. Okay, you're welcome, Ann White. So now we're going to be discussing late blight and how you can identify it. So the leaves have large, dark brown blotches, and they tend to have a greenish gray edge. And the veins of the plant is also affected when you have late blight. Also, this may occur at any stage in the growth of your plant. So, unlike the early blight that occurs after the plant start fruiting, late blight occurs at any stage. So, from seedlings all the way up till the plant produces fruit, any stage, late blight can start. So, the next question: how are fruits affected by late blight? First, the dark firm circles or spots are formed on your stems. It starts on your leaves, it goes to the stem, and it goes to the fruits. If affected by a secondary bacteria, then the spot that is infected can become mushy. So your fruit, you're going to see firm, dark, circular spots on your fruits, and this will occur all over your fruits. With the early blight, the fruit usually have spots, circular spots close to the stem of the fruit. But with the late blight, the spots can occur over the entire fruits. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. In what temperature is late blight most likely to occur? Late blight like cool, damp temperatures. So between 60 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit is when late blight is most likely to occur. So we are seeing a slight difference between the late blight and the early blight where temperature is concerned, because the early blight is between 59 and 80 degrees Celsius, whereas the late blight is between 60 and 70 degrees. Oh, did I say 59 to 80 degrees Celsius? Because it's not Celsius, it's Fahrenheit. And then the late blight is between 60 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Right, so that's the temperature that it is like. So if the conditions, if you have blight and the condition is on the drier side for a few days, hot and dry, then the spread of the late blight will reduce because it doesn't have the moisture and the cool temperature that it needs in order for it to keep on germinating and spreading. Okay, so the next question. We're going to be discussing the third type of blight, which is Septoria leaf spot. So how can you identify this? This blight is kind of similar to the early blight in that the spot starts on the leaves that are lowest to the ground. And like the early blight, symptoms will usually start appearing after the plant start producing fruit. They are circular and about a 16th of an inch to a quarter inch in diameter. And they are dark brown and they usually occur around the margin of your leaves. And unlike the late and early blight that occurs sporadically over the leaf, the septoria tend to occur all over the leaf. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next questions. Oh yeah, are your fruits usually affected by Septoria leaf spot? As the name suggests, it's on the leaf, so your fruits very rarely ever get affected by this type of blight. Now, what conditions does Septoria leaf spot prefer? They prefer temperatures between 60 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and they like high humidity as well. So we see a similarity with the early blight as well, because here we're seeing that it requires 60 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the same as the early blight. Now, how can you control blight? Because we've completed looking at the three types of blight. We said we have early blight, we have late blight, and we have septoria leaf spots. Now these three blights, they are not one stage that develop into another. They are separate. They are caused by separate types of pathogens. So let's look at how we can go about controlling these blights. So the list is extensive, and so I'm going to be reading them for you. So one is that you're going to be removing the affected portion of your plant. So if you see, oh, hi, her healthy home. I'm glad that you could join us. Right, so if you see that your plant is starting to develop blights, any of the three types of blights, you want to immediately remove the section that is infected. If you allow it to stay, then the chances of it spreading is very high, and especially so for the late blight. The late blight spreads vigorously, so you have to make sure that you remove it as quickly as possible. Right, so remove the portion of your plant that is infected. If, however, you find that the condition is severe, root out the plant. You want to get rid of the plant completely. So you're going to take out, you're not going to cut the plant down to the ground. You're going to take even the root of the plant out. You have to dispose of it. Put it in a plastic bag, tie the plastic bag, put it in your garbage, or burn it. You cannot compost this because blight can live in your soil for 2 years. So once you remove the plant, you have to get rid of it. If you just remove damaged portion of your plants, you have to get rid of it. So tie it in a plastic bag, put it in your garbage, or burn it. But don't compost it because you will be affecting your other plants that are susceptible to the blight. Yes, it's a lot, right? And a lot of times we can mistake blight for something else. We can assume that maybe we're not giving the plants enough water, so the plant is dying. But if you look for the spots that are mentioned, the symptoms that are mentioned, then you should be able to identify the problem. And once you see the problem, once you know what it is, then you have to work at eradicating it as quickly as possible. Okay, now if you have blights or to control blight, it is best to use drip irrigation, or if you don't have drip irrigation in your garden, then try your best not to water from overhead, because as you water your plant from overhead, you're going to be spreading the pathogen by two means. One, the water is going to be bouncing from one leaf to another or from one plant to another, or when the water hits the ground, the soil is going to bounce up onto your plants, and then that is going to help to spread the spores that causes blight. So try to use drip irrigation or water as close to the ground as possible. Okay, the next way that you can control blight is by mulching around your plant, because as we mentioned, when the water hits the soil, then the soil bounces back, the contaminated soil bounces back up onto your plant, and then that is how one of the ways that the blight spores will spread. So by putting mulch, whether you're going to use plastic mulch or wood mulch or grass straw, any sort of mulch that you have, that is going to prevent the soil from bouncing up onto your plants when you water. Okay, the next thing that you can do is trellis your plants. So there are some plants that are prone to blight, but they don't require trellising. For those ones, you want to remove the leaves that are closest to the ground. If they are plants that require trellising, then you want to trellis them, because that is going to help. The next thing that you can do is, once you're using any form of tool in your garden, when you have blight, make sure that you clean your tools, disinfect your tools. If you are working in your garden and you come across blight in the area that the blight is, change your clothes before you actually go into another portion of your garden, because the spores that are on your clothes is going to be transferred to other plants. So you want to maintain cleaner tools regularly, and don't go through your entire garden with your tools if you were handling blight. Clean the tool first and then move on to the rest of your garden. Avoid working around your plants if they're infected when the plant is wet, because when the plant is wet, the spores are going to be multiplying faster and you're going to be spreading it faster too. So if your plant is wet while it is infected, then don't work in your garden. It is best to water your garden early in the morning so that you have enough sun to dry off the excess liquid or the excess moisture that is on your plant so that it can get the spores under control. Okay, next point on how to control the blight is to fertilize regularly, because the fertilizer is going to encourage your plant to grow more vigorous and grow more foliage. Because one of the problems with the three types of blight is that it affects the leaves of the plant. The leaves of the plant will eventually die or dry up, which means that a lot of the protection that your fruit would have from the sun is no longer available, and so you're going to end up with your fruits being scald from the sun. So you want to fertilize as much as you can to increase your foliage so that your fruits can get some level of protection. If you have infected plants, if your plants are infected with blight, do not store the seeds for the next growing season, because the seeds can be contaminated, and when you plant them, one, the seed, even if they germinate, they're going to die. Two, the blight can be spread from the plant to the soil and or from the plant to other plants. So it is best not to store seeds once your plant is infected with blight. Okay, the next thing that you can do is control weed. There are some weeds that are more susceptible to blight, like the horse nettle or the nightshade weeds. So do your best to control weeds so that you can help to control the blight. And also rotating your crop is a very good idea, because blight can be in your soil for up to 2 years. So you want to rotate your crops so that you are not transferring the blight from one plant to another. Okay, so late blight, unlike the other two, it germinates rapidly. It is constantly reproducing. And because of how fast it can spread, you want to ensure that as soon as it is identified, even though you need to do this for all the three types of blight, you want to get it under control as quickly as possible. Now we have looked at how you can control blight. Let's look at what type of plants are prone to blight. Now I've only listed a few, but there could be more plants that are susceptible to blight. So your tomatoes, your potatoes, your peppers, apple trees, these are susceptible to blight. And any member that is in the tomato family, the tomato, potatoes, and peppers are said to be in a similar family. So that is why they are prone to blight. So when you're planting your garden, if you know that this year you had tomatoes and your tomatoes had blight, you wouldn't want to be planting any of these other plants that are prone to blight in that location. You would want to plant things that are not prone to blight in that location. If at all possible, and you have enough garden space, then it would be a good idea not to plant in that space for 2 years. But as we know, a lot of times we don't have a lot of growing space, so it's best to rotate your crop. I can see that someone else has joined the live. I don't know who, so I'm just going to say hi to you and thank you for joining the live. Okay, so now here's an important question, because we know that a lot of pathogens can be overwinter and some cannot. So, can blights be overwintered? Yes. The early blight can overwinter, and the Septoria leaf spot can overwinter. However, the late blight cannot overwinter, and this is because you think so. Okay, yes. The late blight, however, cannot be overwintered, and this is because it requires a host. It has to have living tissue in order for it to be able to reproduce. So your late blight cannot overwinter, but the early blight and the septoria leaf spot can overwinter. And now we're going to ask the final question. How far can wind carry blight? Anybody care to take a guess? How far can the wind carry blight? I'll just wait a little bit for someone to answer if they want to take a guess. Two miles. Okay. Wind can actually carry the blight spores up to 30 miles. 30. That's how far it can carry it, which is one of the reasons why 20 feet. Okay. Yes, 30 miles is how far it can carry it. And that is why it is so important to get it under control the moment it is identified. Because not only can it damage your garden, but it can damage the garden for other people as well. So we want to get it under control as much as possible, as soon as possible. So again, you want to, if your plants is severely damaged, it cannot be cured. None of the three types of blight can be cured. So if the plant is severely damaged, root it out. You want to make sure you get the root out as well. Put it in a plastic bag, tie the plastic bag, discard it in your garbage, or you burn the plant. Don't try to save it, don't try to compost it. If the plant is just starting to show symptoms, then you can just take off the affected area. But then you're going to still have to monitor the plant, because as you know, sometimes you might see symptoms in some areas. The symptoms might just be developing and you don't see it. So once your plant was infected, you have to keep monitoring it to ensure that you got all of the infected portion of the plants off. Okay, so that is it, guys. We have come to the end of the live. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'm happy that you were all able to join me for this discussion. Thank you for taking part in it. And I haven't come up with a topic for next Monday's discussion yet, but as usual, on Friday, I will be having the worm farming Q&A live, and that is going to be at 12 noon. So feel free to join me if you are so inclined. So thank you for being here, and I hope you have yourself a wonderful evening. Oh, thank you, Ann White. Oh, you're most welcome, Russell. Okay, so that is it. I am signing out now. Thank you all for being a part of this live. No, I'm going to be looking out for it. Okay, yes.